So what I'd like to do is to set a stage for discussions and paint a picture of how much complexity that we're dealing with now and will deal with even more in the future, and why that's the case. And I want to start with this quote from Jane Jacobs, the author of The Death and Life of Great American Cities. She wrote her book while I was still in high school. And she really captures the essence of where we've gone astray. We have certainly over-designed our cities for our cars and not the people who live in the cities. But once we understand the complexity of cities, we realize there's just so much more we need to understand and work from in order to make the right decisions. So just as an example, this is a neighborhood, could be anywhere, but it's not somewhere a parent would want their child to pass through. So I always ask what's missing. The obvious ones I think everyone here is going to pick out, right? It would be, what would you add? Sidewalks. Crosswalks too. Then the trees. That's very important. But the big one, what's really missing, and I think would concern any parent, is not yet shown. And that is, we want security. And to have security, we have to rewrite our town code to call for, require buildings to watch over the street. Now once that happens, once a person feels like their child is going to be in the presence of people, then many people will come to the park. And when many people are at the park, then it becomes a very safe place. So that's the complexity we're dealing with. We've got the streets. And even if we say to complete them, we want to add sidewalks or crossings, both, we haven't completed the neighborhood. So there's that added layer of how do we now maximize the ability to walk to places like to stores, schools, parks, and so on. And it means we have to look at everything we do as a city, including, in this case, you're looking very seriously at form-based code. Not just to have housing, that was already zoned there, but to require the housing to watch over the street as you see here. Let's take that to the next level. So we design a school. And with the school we say, you know, we can't have a building that only functions for one purpose. That's just wasteful of our very precious resources. Let's also engage a park. And when we do that, the parking serves at least two needs. And then let's, again, make sure we have the eyes on the realm so that parents are going to feel comfortable having their children come. And now we get into additional issues. Well, what type of housing should watch over a school? And based on where the school is, its size, its scale, other things, it may end up being multifamily. That way we get the greatest benefit of people being able to have their child walk to school and so on. And then further back, we may have more of the single family stock and things like that. So again, we see how we need for land use and transportation to become partners. So when we design the streets, we're not only design it for the fact that there's a school here, but that we're going to have a lot of people living here. We're going to not create too much pavement, and so we're going to manage the pavement in a very purposeful way. So that gets us into access, sidewalks, intersections, shared parks, separation trees, security, drop-off zones, crossings, and streets. And right now, our school designers are not trained in how to do this, and nor would you have the right code in order to carry this out. So this is raising the levels of complexity. Now, to better understand where we're going and to define a couple of terms, and you're probably familiar with both of these terms I'm about to introduce. This is the first development in America, and it met the quality or the standards of the time. Lots of open space, a fairly natural park setting right where you lived. And then because we didn't have Euclidean zoning, which separates every land use, you could walk to almost any use. Anything that was any further, transit would work because you had enough density to support high density. So this was like nirvana, but this is, when we use the term traditional, this is what we're talking about. It's the old way of building America. Then we went to what we now call conventional. And we used Euclidean zoning. We separated every land use. You could live here. You could have a sidewalk. You might have an occasional tree. You certainly have the delivery roads and quiet streets, perhaps. Blocks are a little long. But you can't go anywhere unless you drove. So today, if we were to retrofit that, and we have these many challenges, how do we make a link into where you could walk easily to where there is shopping? And you can see it's right within present. But that would be a next step for a community, is to create an attractive, functional walk. One of the towns we just recently worked in Florida, Naples, and a couple of the towns there, virtually all the neighborhoods are walled and gated. And so we're trying to figure out, well, if we were to help you become more walkable and bike friendly, where do we begin? Because it's one after the other walled gated communities. We just learned in a workshop we did 2 days ago that Hertz is moving their world headquarters to this area. And the realtor that spoke to us said that she has interviewed over 20 people who are looking for homes from Hertz, and every single one asked, where are the sidewalks? Where are the bike trails? And they have a big road to hoe, as we say, because they built all their infrastructure for exclusivity and so on. The market has shifted dramatically. And these are people they want to hold on to. These are middle managers for a big corporation, over 1,000 new employees, trying to find a place they can live and have the lifestyle they'd like. You have it much better, of course, but your future growth, you want to focus on these kinds of details. But in some of your cases, I'd say a majority, it's really how do you retrofit now? How do you get walks in where they didn't exist, as you expressed? How do you fill the gaps and things like that? Now, it wasn't too far ago that not a lot of people in the nation had awakened. This is 2005 when I found this. And it basically was the sentiment of the time: give me a house where I can qualify for a loan. And the developers had their preferred way of building. We call these snout garages. And so yes, you have the sidewalks, but how comfortable would you feel walking through a neighborhood where you don't actually see or engage any person? So this is a challenge. And but this is where we were as a society as recently as 2005, that this was something a good reporter basically said this is the master plan for the new America. So I'd like to introduce, and I'm pretty sure it's a term most people in the room are familiar with, but I want to bring everyone to the same common language, and that is to point out the distinction between Euclidean zoning, which is still our common way of approving and building any project, to one that we're going to, in order to be able to build the kind of America that people now seek, and easily 85% of Americans are seeking this market. They may not know what to call it, but they want something that engages the street, where they feel watched over, where the speeds aren't too high, where they don't have to drive that far to get to what services they'd like. This is an instrument we call form-based code. So it doesn't replace zoning, but it now gives a definition and fulfills an expectation of what it's going to look like, act like, feel like, how it's going to perform, and how it's going to make more money than the form that is already on the ground. So we like to say the big thing about form-based code is it's a very optimistic view of city making, and it helps us get to where we would like in order to have maximum health, highest prosperity, greatest sustainability, resiliency, and so on. So one of these is form-based and the other one is not. They're both zoned, and both are probably the same category of zoning. On the left, which is the zoning, it's very predictable if that's what the comfort level is of the bankers, the realtors, and the developers. And they know how to build it, they know how to pull a profit out of it, and they're generally pleased with that. But what the market now says, and again, it's like 85% of the home buying market, those people are looking for a house today, they're looking more for this. So this is form-based. And again, it might be the same zoning, but as an added tool, the form-based gives you something very predictable, very walkable in this case, and high quality, high security. The interesting thing is, the one that is actually more density, more units per acre, is the one that people aren't objecting to. So when people are saying we don't want density, they may not understand the term density. What they probably want is something more attractive, something that better engages the street and makes them feel they're part of a neighborhood where they would know their neighbors and so on. So that would fall under the form-based code. There are many benefits of form-based code, and again, just a review of what zoning calls for. And again, you're very familiar, I'm sure, with the different categories, but it's based on classifying land uses and setting standards based on the zoning, and a focus on density and so on. And when we get into traditional development, then we're getting into a lot of additional items that get described. They're very predictable. It creates a level playing field for all of the developers if we take a portion of a city, a whole district, an entire neighborhood perhaps, and say this will be a model for form-based code. Any developer who comes and builds new units here is expected to follow certain streetscape, building placement, types of streets, and so on. And this improves the value of the market and gives the customer what they're now asking for. More and more people are doing this. Just a little more on the form-based code, because I understand this is a tool that you're looking at quite seriously. It's important that everybody understands the value of it, or how different it is, and where you're going to get some added strengths. One of the things that we're helping with, certainly when it comes to blue zones and building the healthier neighborhoods, is giving you some structure to go by on block length, block perimeter, how many connections you get out of a dozen acres or whatever it might be. And the greater the street connectivity, the lower the speeds, therefore the less you have to do to slow traffic back down again. So all these things go into a good form-based code, and they can include things like the parks and placement and things like that. Now let's go to an actual project. And I want to now be able to capture how meaningful this is, and share with you some of the issues that get brought out. This is a project I got to work on. It's in Loma Linda, California. One of the 5 true Blue Zones research communities. Before Dan Buechner started out, this was one of those communities. The road out here is Mission. As a street type, it's a collector. It collects the traffic off of the local streets. And what the developer had in mind was to put the true mansions, the highest value homes, largest homes, on the principal street. Now, most developers shy away from doing that. They're actually leaving a huge amount of their value on the table, and they're doing it because they don't know how to coordinate or communicate with the community to get the street to behave the way it should behave. So in our case, I was able to go in, work with the county and the city, and get them to design the street to where the speeds would be very modest, and where we could add all the added beauty, the medians, and load it up with great street trees, sidewalks, and so on. And by doing that, gave the developer a huge added value. But we didn't do it just to give the developer more money. We did it for people to be able to walk. So if you're going to walk, you have to get to the collector streets, and the collector streets have to behave themselves well. And if the homes don't face the street because the developer can't sell them, then the whole ability of walking falls apart. So this gets into another layer of how complex the ideas that Jane Jacobs was expressing go back. Now, one of the things I insisted upon with the developer is to maximize park space. And I had the research knowledge and base to know that every home that actually faces onto open space, whether it's a trail or anything open, you get a higher land value, you get a higher return on investment. So the same home pulls in an extra bonus 15 or 20%. So the developer understood that, and he put in all kinds of appropriate parks. We use a scale of you wouldn't have to go more than 1/8 of a mile to get to a park. And then we interconnected all of the parks using trails. And by doing that, gave everyone there in the community a choice of parks they could go to and so on. And this added a lot of additional value for the developer and met the health needs of the community. So it was another bonus. But there's another teaching point here, and that's this area here. If you saw it in reality, it's a high-speed voltage transmission corridor in the mega kilowatts. And normally that would be considered wasteland. But the developer said, I can turn that into a gorgeous park. So that all the homes that watch over that open space, they're not looking into an empty wasteland, they're looking into something very attractive. We can put a trail through there, all the amenities. And they were ready to go forward. But at a city council meeting the night this was to be approved, people who said they were environmentalists, I don't think they were, but they said they were, said, we don't believe in density. That's not against, that is against what we believe in. And so where the developer needed a certain yield in order to build the park and create the homeowners association so that the city wouldn't have to maintain it, the developer was asked to come back. He repenciled it. He did everything he could to save on costs and so on. Came back, and I can't remember the exact number of units per acre, but I think it was 12 or so units per acre, which is still a good yield. It was opposed again by the same group and shot down. They had to drop the density even more for getting approval. And now the city had to build the park. And the city has to maintain the park because they couldn't get enough yield to maintain it. So it shows how important decision making is. And when we follow the right principles, we can get the right health outcomes, we can get the right prosperity out of an acre of land. But it's got to be understood by every group. We know that the group that came to oppose it, that their national leadership is not expressing that at all. That in fact they understand the value of density and they make the case for it as being an environmental issue that they want to support. So now let's turn to streets. Most anyone that would look at this street would say the speeds are too high, right? And so we look at all the tools that are available to us, and some of them are tools that a city that's got a lot of choices in what they pay attention to could do. Today it's incomplete, it's not good for walking, cycling, probably not ideal for transit, and it's also not ideal for the motorist for a number of reasons. Because of the speeds, it's hard to get in and out of driveways. So a first step would be to make use of some additional tools. Notice the colorized median. In this case, the colorized parking decks. The bike lane is a different color yet. They purposely narrowed down the street to about 10-foot lanes in order to get a better speed, but it's not complete. And so we add in the park cars, the vertical wall of green trees, but it's still not complete. And now we add in this case, a modern intersection. It happens to be a roundabout. And now we've gotten it far enough that the speeds are down low, that developers can come in and say, okay, now we feel that we can contribute to buildings and make good money and so on. So a complete street is never complete. I like to say it's organic, but when it's truly complete, you've set the stage for really good development to come in and now populate the street, because now the buildings hold the street, the windows add the right transparency, the people are watched over, and now you're there. So every act that you make helps get you toward that place, but any particular project won't get you all the way to that place. I now want to share some what I think of as inexpensive solutions. And when Jen and I were able to travel through the neighborhoods, these are the things I had in mind for some of your streets. This particular neighborhood is a very important one. It serves a school, an elementary. The sidewalks are a little thin, but they still work, but the speeds are pretty high. And so some of the research I've done in Europe especially, this is what I proposed. Take out the center line and now put in two bold edge lines. The model or the formula I personally like to follow is the space between the two white lines is 18 feet. That's plenty of room for even two semis to pass if they needed to. They obviously would do it with caution. But the point is, now you have this buffer away from the sidewalk. It's a very low-cost solution. You basically traded paint in one location for paint in another location. You can't do it on every street. You have certain thresholds our engineers must follow. So for example, if you're above 6,000 trips per day on this street, you probably would look at some other solution. But some of the streets we were looking at last night, you had thresholds where this would be actually a very good tool and solve a lot of problems. So we went to the next level. This is a community called Fairhope, Alabama. It's voted one of the 10 most beautiful towns in the world. And they were going to resurface every street downtown. I think it was over 20 different streets, and some of them were fairly long. And so they started their resurfacing, and then they gave me a call and said, Dan, how soon can you get here? I said, well, I can be there by early January. And they said, good, we need you to tell us where to put the paint. So on this road that had double yellows, and I studied the volumes. You can see it's getting toward a higher volume. But it still fell under the golden number of 6,000. And I said, let's do the 18-foot. And they did that style of treatment. We did different takes on different streets, but they used that as their guide, and they brought down their speeds in their downtown, typically 7 miles per hour. Their crashes have come down, and all they've done is saved on paint. And make it safer, easier to get in and out of parked cars. I would say this street is complete, and all they had to do was use some paint. So again, we were being very specific to the neighborhood, the volume of traffic, the type of traffic, and everything like that. And you have this opportunity. It would save you money, and it would really make the neighbors happier, because in almost every neighborhood I've ever worked in, people don't want the speeds as high as they're experiencing. There will be neighborhoods where it would be very expensive to go in and build all the ledges, retaining walls, everything that it would take, and you got more than adequate pavement. And so I've been collecting a number of these examples. Typically what we would do, based on the width of the road, is double stripe the area, the line, so it's very bold. We might even insert other treatments along with this, and then mark this as a good place for walking. Now, it's in a neighborhood. The volumes are appropriate for doing this. It's not something you would uniformly apply in all neighborhoods or all local streets, but it's actually an excellent solution when you come into these types of constraints, right?
On that last one, where would you put your bikes?
The bikes on this one, because we would pay attention to the posted speed and the actual speeds and the sight lines, we would probably use sharrows on this street. We just don't have that much extra space. Yeah. I would also hazard a guess that if there aren't a lot of pedestrians, some or many bicycles would be in the shared space. Yeah. And indeed, you could create it as intended to be shared by both bikes and pedestrians. Yeah. Now let's get into some other complexities. This community built a 20-foot wide lane that meets the basic need for the fire code. And they put a sidewalk on only one side. And because of the number of the driveways, this is not a really pleasant place to walk. The few times I've driven past this and stopped to see the activity, I rarely see a pedestrian. I would say this is a poorly executed use of very minimal footprint. Certainly if we could have gone back to a drawing board, I would have suggested that they do some other level of treatment in order to deal with this, but I would say chances are good to high that most people are walking in the street. And that may be fine if you didn't have a lot of traffic. I believe that project ends where you see that one angle park car at an angle, and that may be adequate for that treatment. But there is a sidewalk on only one side. Yeah, and it's interrupted by driveway after driveway after driveway. Yeah. Now let's go to a very popular corridor. This is a corridor in University Place, Washington, that rebuilt their street, Grandview Drive, and used 7 different typical sections. Very different treatments in 7 different areas. Some places they had steep drop-offs. This is one of those. Some areas they had lots of housing stock and driveways. Some areas they had just a really good buffer. And this, I think, is one of the most beautifully executed complete streets in America today, because they flexed every single block. And if the housing stock changed, they changed the design of the sidewalk for that. But in every single linear foot of this corridor, there are sidewalks on both sides of the street, because this is a very, very important road for the neighborhood. By doing this, and doing this for the length of the corridor, they raised the value of all the homes within walking distance of this corridor. And I've been able to prove this to the entire community. The community's a population, when we started, about 30,000. I think they're up to 40,000 now. And this is one of the most sought after places in the entire state of Washington because of their walkability. When we started, there was less than 1 mile of sidewalk in the entire town. Today there's only 1 mile of sidewalk to complete. So I would say this is not only excellent design, but the fact that they flexed and made everything work multiple ways makes it even better. By the way, this is a magical number that you want to keep the lanes as narrow as you can, to hold speed down and reduce crashes modestly. But you need a place, especially if you're going to have medians, which you do sections up and back, you need a place for the motors to pull over in order to let the fire truck get by. And in this case, we actually widened the sidewalk. Normally it's only 6. Now I believe this was either 7 or 8, but we did it because it had to be at the curb. We didn't have a choice because of the vertical drop. So
do you pile snow in the bike lane?
Yeah. Well, they don't get much snow, but that's where I would think they would plow it too. Yeah. We probably only have a couple of plows the whole time. I want to close out with just a couple. Yes.
Is there any, that street you were just showing, is there any parking on that street at all?
A lot. Not here. This is a section where there's no housing and no need for the parking, so they left it out here. But you get up here, and it starts it's actually a golf course, but it's one of the biggest golf courses in the Pacific Northwest. It's where they held the U.S. Open this year. And there, they have a whole line of parking, yes.
So where's the parking at? Using this street for an example.
Yeah,
Where would you park?
yeah. In their case, further up, what they did is they set the sidewalk further back, and then they inset the parking. So the parking, I want to say in that next section is on both sides of the street, but it's certainly on the golf course side.
So your right-of-way is wider?
Yes, oh, look, well, they have enough right-of-way here, it's just that there's a steep vertical drop, so it just was impractical to do
Wider.
anything else.
So where did the bike lane go then? If you had the parking, was the bike lane, was there a lane? Is that-
Yes, we just make sure there's enough dimension. We like to get at least 13 feet in combination. And so, and again, in this case, they could build at any dimension. They have enough right away.
And on this street, what would be the posted speed limit?
This one, I believe, is posted at 30. And seems to be really fine. And by the way, that's the sweet spot for capacity. 30 miles an hour will accommodate more cars than any other speed. You get much lower, you're losing a little bit of your carrying capacity. You get any higher, you start to get in all kinds of other crazy things like accordion effect and other things. So 30, if that's your goal, is to really max out the total, right around 30 is a sweet spot for capacity. I want to show you one other to show how things come together. I think we can turn the lights back on. But this is a 5-lane road, and it's a village that is being transformed. It was all strip, and so the first part of the task is to start building the buildings to the street. And what was so interesting is behind these buildings, the strip center is still open. And until the day they open the stores here and the uses further back come to the street, it's truly still producing all the income that they could. I do want to share with this one with you too. It's a project called Tukwila, Washington. Right now it's one of the big malls and a lot of land. And the region now has a newer mall. So this mall got outmalled. And so Tukwila has the brilliance of hiring a brilliant architect, Michael Freeman, to come in and convert it to a village. So when we were doing our general presentation last night, and people asked, well, where can you create these walkable scale communities? I think you have at least a dozen. You know, just from previous trips here, I can think of a number of places that could convert. As your market forces allow you to, you can now create these incredible, authentic, character-driven places. You've already started to rescue some of your great neighborhoods. The one we were in last night is, yeah. And it's just an example. But this is where the market is heading. And almost any realtor will say, give us this opportunity. Those who are studying where the market forces are leading us, that's what the buyer wants, is truly walkable. So, hope that helped.